This is English Grammar Course 101. This will be a 15-part course over the elements of English grammar. Each lecture will be about 30 minutes with a few exercises at the end. You can theoretically skip the exercises, but they provide a reminder of the topics which we've covered, so they are helpful in retaining some of this information. We're going to begin with an overview of language itself, and this is going to help you understand exactly why you would want to know English grammar better. Being a grammar nerd is something that is learned. No one pops out of the womb a grammar nerd. You may be one of those people who thinks, oh, everyone knows grammar better than me, or you may think that those who know grammar really well are just inherently smarter. This isn't true. Everyone who knows grammar very well at some point studied it. Perhaps they paid more attention in 7th or 8th grade grammar than you did. But if you apply yourself, by the end of the course, you'll be able to contend with the best of them. Well, we start with an overview of language itself. You must understand from the outset that you honestly know language better than you think you do. Let me give you a simplistic example. Without any formal training, you can tell that this sentence, there's something wrong with it. Jim passed the big red ball, Fred. Now, without any formal training, you know that this is ungrammatical, that it is not American English. What's wrong with it? Well, we need the word to here. Jim passed the big red ball to Fred. Otherwise, it is an ungrammatical sentence, and you know all that because you know the internals of language. No one had to teach you that that sentence is not American English. You know it because it doesn't sound right. Something in it doesn't sound right, and therefore you know it's ungrammatical. And therefore it would never escape your lips in normal conversation because it is ungrammatical. You have an internal mechanism to know whether a sentence is grammatical or not. It isn't foolproof, but it's quite complex, and it is reliable. In conversation, you may not even realize or even care if a sentence is ungrammatical, because you're more concerned with communication. Therefore, you may try to make sense of ungrammatical constructions in conversations because you're not going to stop and examine, oh, Barbara, you actually didn't use that participle correctly. Therefore, our minds try to make sense of even the most tangled sentences. Let me give you another example. Frank eating Franks. And we're going to denote an ungrammatical sentence with an asterisk, but we don't need to do that because you know that this is ungrammatical. There are certain things missing. A proper verb and a direct object. What is Frank eating? And normally we wouldn't use Frank's, we would just say his. So then how is it that you can tell me without training what is grammatical and what is not? It's because you haven't learned language in a classroom, you have acquired language. When linguists talk about humans and language, they use this word acquired, not learned. There's a difference. Think about your childhood. Did your parents sit you down when you were 2 or 3 and teach you the elements of American English? Language, it seems, almost magically gets implanted in your brain with very little effort on your part. All that seems to be required is that you had input from your parents or your siblings or other children or even the television. You may have never thought of this before. If you have children, it was a delight when they first started putting words together or calling you mama or dada. This happened not because you sat them down and taught them, but it was automatic. Lucretius, in his De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, he says that humans learn language over time, just like we see a dog who makes noises in various ways for certain emotions. Humans learn to express themselves. This is sort of a foolish and simplistic understanding of language. Anyone who's studied language knows that it's way more complex than any form of communication within the animal kingdom. The only animal which even comes close, and it doesn't come close, but the one that comes close in nature are bees. Carl von Frisch, he studied their communication, and while it's complex, it can't even begin to compare with English language. Bees actually dance to communicate, and it's very complex. pretty interesting the way they do it, though. They dance, they can even indicate where a food source is, and they can indicate not only distance but also declination. So it is complex, but when you think about language, it doesn't even come close. But that's it. In the all animal kingdom, that's the only thing that naturally occurring comes even remotely close to normal language. Animals, as we know, can be taught rudimentary signs, like Coco the gorilla, who learned thousands of words in sign language. But this is tantamount to teaching your dog to ring a bell to be let outside to pee. Or if your dog has no water or food, she'll lick and bark until she gets what she wants. These are behaviors and a form of communication, but this is far removed from what language is. Getting back to human language, though, linguists, they don't actually know how it happens, but they have a few theories. Universal grammar is one of those theories. Noam Chomsky actually put this theory forth, and it's very interesting. I mean, and when you think of these conceptions, they wouldn't say that this is actually what's going on in the brain, but it's more of a construct to understand what's going on. In other words, they wouldn't say that this is exactly what's going on when you acquire language, but they say it's a way to conceive of it. So universal grammar says that we as humans, we're sort of hardwired for language, and when we pop out of the womb, and we have a sort of universal grammar in our brains, and all that our brains need in order to process and acquire language is input. And when it starts getting input, that's when it starts constructing the language. And because languages all really follow some basic principles, this universal grammar can take input from any language and acquire it. I say that after our brain lateralizes, or around the age of 12, and also coupled with the fact that we've already acquired a language, we have to then learn all subsequent languages. In other words, our native language is acquired, but there comes a point in time where we have to actually learn all other languages that we want to speak or use. Humans can, however, learn more than one language. Acquire more than one language. We know of bilinguals that can acquire one or two or more languages. There are certain people on the planet who have actually acquired even more than that, because in their youth of consistent exposure to multiple languages, they acquire them. But even these people who speak multiple languages, after, as they approach adolescence and thereafter, they still, if they want to use a different language, must learn it, not acquire it. And because of this fact, this is why you did so poorly in high school French or Spanish. You had to actually exert some effort to study and learn these languages. They are wholly different than your first language. So all this to say that language, the language that you speak today, your vernacular, that is the language that you speak natively, it was acquired when you were very young. This is why today you can read an American sentence and immediately know if it's ungrammatical or not. So the sentence, Harry Jim table or 8 blankets. You can immediately look at that sentence, hear that sentence, and know, oh, this is an ungrammatical sentence. You can try to make sense of it, but you would never utter this sentence in normal conversation because it doesn't sound like American English, and therefore your brain wouldn't let you say this because you know it's not proper. Something else you need to keep in mind is that spoken language is very distinct from written language. Whereas you acquired American English, you did not acquire reading and writing. So there's language that can be inside your head, and yet there's also language in written form, which is outside of your head. This is something, reading and writing, this is something you either had to learn at school or learn from your parents. This fact is incredibly important to keep in mind. No one pops out of the womb a literary critic. You must learn this. You may have known people who didn't learn to read or write, but they could speak their native language perfectly. They had no problems at all communicating, even in complex ways. They could even compose poetry orally, but they lacked the skills to put these words onto paper and read them, because written language must be learned. It is not acquired. Why is this important? It's important to keep in mind because there are things which we can say, but we would never write in a paper. For example, it's often said that ain't isn't a word. You may use this word every day. In fact, you may be using it even right now. Or you might know that you may know people that use it in speech, but would never write it in a paper for fear of receiving a lower grade. There are even some who say that it shouldn't even be used in speech. Or how about the word y'all? This word itself is used repeatedly in the South, but it is never used in formal writing. Would anyone argue that y'all isn't a word? I hear it repeatedly in the South. In American English, you is the word we use not only for the singular but also for the plural. Therefore, in certain areas, to make up for this ambiguity, y'all evolved. And in fact, other areas have equivalents. In certain areas, you guys takes the place of y'all, or the plural you. In Pittsburgh, we use the word yins instead of y'all. So you might hear this sentence if you went to Pittsburgh. Yins going downtown to see them Pens tonight. And it's perfectly grammatical as far as spoken language. Yins is the plural you in Pittsburgh. So then how can spoken language, whereas it's related, how can it be different and distinct from written language? The answer goes back to how language comes about. It goes back to language being acquired. It is automatic, but reading and writing is learned. We've sort of developed these styles of writing in order to keep the language consistent and understandable across a large swath of language learners. So when you say, oh, I'm so stupid I can't write, in truth, what you're really saying is this. You haven't been taught to write in a particular recognized style. And these styles are good for certain reasons. Could you imagine trying to read if we had no standards in spelling? Try reading a sentence. I'd like to know just how I'm expected to read this sentence. I mean, that's incredibly hard to read as opposed to this one, because there's a certain standard in spelling that we have learned. It would be murder to try and read and read when books aren't written in a particular way. In fact, in the Renaissance, there were no standards of spelling when composing in Latin, and there are many works which vary wildly in spelling, and they're hard to read, and especially with an inflected language like Latin, it becomes excruciating. But there are a bunch of standards out there, MLA, Chicago. These are standards of writing, and these standards must be learned, not acquired. But now, the amazing thing about these standards is that they can actually inform our internal language system. And they, to a certain degree, they make us better at communicating. For example, anyone who has acquired American English, they're able to use adverbs. And even though they don't really know what adverbs are or what they do, they can use them consistently. But if I know what adverbs actually do, for example, they modify and qualify verbs, I can then consciously and deliberately choose my words in order to be more precise in my communication. So language can be both internal and external. We go back to our little picture of our guy, where language is internal and yet it can be external as well. And so if we learn certain things about the language that I speak, it can make my language better. This is important to remember because this is why we're learning grammar. It helps us in our speaking and our writing. It's a standard that tries, and to a large degree it's successful, it tries to stop language flux. What do I mean by language flux? Language is constantly changing. We are constantly adding new words. We're using words in different ways and changing our language. Let me give you an example. The other day, I texted my wife this sentence. Dude, text me the GPS coordinates of the Starbucks in 5 points. If I were 12 years old in 1985 and someone showed me this sentence and told me, hey, this is you talking to your wife in the future, I wouldn't understand a word of it. because we didn't use language in this way back in the 80s. I would wonder, why am I calling my wife a dude? And frankly, it would scare me. Why is the word text being used as a verb? And what the stank are GPS coordinates? And what on earth is a Starbucks? Language is always changing, but these standards of style try to stop that, at least on paper. So, whereas I could use this sentence in speech, I would never write this in a paper. My style would be more formal. And so, the 12-year-old me in 1980 could, by and large, read and understand my papers, although my speech, not so much.